The last crew truck rumbles away down the long gravel drive, and you are alone with the house. It stands 3 stories tall against the Virginia sky, its white columns streaked gray from nearly 2 centuries of rain and sun. The air is thick with the smell of wet lumber and cut grass, the ordinary sounds of a workday fading into the distance. But as the engine noise dies, something else rises to take its place, a kind of stillness that has nothing to do with peace. It presses in on you from all sides, heavy as the August heat, settling over your shoulders like a weight you can't quite shrug off. You find yourself listening for something you can't name. A voice, a footstep, an explanation for why this beautiful old place feels less like a home and more like a vault. You tell yourself it's just the exhaustion talking. 16-hour days will do that to a person. But as you walk back toward the front door, your boots crunching on the crushed stone path, you notice how the birds have gone quiet, how the shadows beneath the oak trees seem darker than they should be at this hour, how the windows of the second floor catch the last light of the dying sun and hold it, refusing to let it go. You've worked on a dozen old houses, and you know their sounds, their creaks, their sighs. This one is different. This one is waiting. The year is 1987, and the Shenandoah Valley is waking up to a hard truth about itself. For generations, the story here has been one thing: the lost cause, the noble sacrifice, the graceful old plantations where gentlemen and ladies lived in a world that was simpler and better than what came after. But the 1980s are forcing a reckoning. Historic preservation has become big business, and with it comes a new kind of scrutiny. You can't just slap a fresh coat of paint on a place like Belle Grove and call it a day. Not anymore. The National Trust wants documentation. The historical societies want provenance. And the foundation that just bought this place wants it restored to its 1860s appearance, which means stripping away everything that came later. Carpet from the 1950s, linoleum from the 1920s, all of it. Layer by layer, year by year, until you reach the original heartwood. It's painstaking work, unglamorous, the kind of labor that breaks your back and blisters your hands and makes you wonder why anyone cares about old floors when there's honest work to be done building something new. But the contract is good money, and the crew is solid, and by the 3rd week, you've settled into the rhythm of it. Pry bar, crowbar, sweat, repeat. You're not looking for secrets. You're not looking for ghosts. You're just looking for the next floorboard. And then, on the morning of June 23rd, you find it. If you're new here, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. These are the stories they don't teach you in school, the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to care enough to look. And while you're at it, drop your state or city in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from tonight. To understand what was about to happen at Belle Grove, you have to understand the Shenandoah Valley in the years after the Civil War. This was ground zero for some of the most brutal fighting in American history. Armies marched through here like weather, consuming everything in their path. Farms were burned. Crops were stolen. Families on both sides were shattered. And when it was over, when the guns finally fell silent at Appomattox in 1865, the valley didn't just have to rebuild. It had to reinvent itself. The old world, the world of cotton and tobacco and human beings bought and sold like livestock, that world was gone. But the people who had lived in it, the people who had benefited from it, they were still here. And they had children, and those children had children, and the stories they told themselves about who they were and what they had done, those stories hardened into something like scripture. By 1987, nearly 130 years had passed since Lee's surrender. The veterans were long dead. The fields had been replanted a dozen times. New houses had gone up. New roads had been cut through the hills. But the valley still carried the weight of that history in ways you could feel, but not quite touch. In the way some families kept to themselves. In the way certain conversations would stop when a stranger walked into a diner. In the way the old plantations stood like monuments to something no one wanted to talk about directly. Belgrove was one of the grandest of them all, built in 1797 by a Philadelphia architect who had never set foot in Virginia before. It was meant to impress. 3 stories of Greek Revival perfection, with proportions so mathematically precise, they made your chest ache just to look at them. 280 acres of rolling hills and formal gardens. Now gone to seed, a family cemetery where the Ashtons had buried their dead for 5 generations. And scattered across the property, hidden in the overgrowth, the crumbling remains of something else. Stone foundations where cabins once stood. A collapsed tobacco barn. A brick springhouse that still held the cold of centuries in its dark interior. The slave quarters. No one had maintained them. No one had restored them. They were just there, slowly returning to the earth, as if the valley itself was trying to swallow the evidence of what had happened on this ground. But the main house, the big house with its white columns and its watching windows that they wanted to save, that was worth preserving. That was history. The man in charge of saving it was named Thomas Garrett, and he was 52 years old with hands that looked like they'd been carved from old barn wood. He'd grown up in the valley, the son of a carpenter who had taught him that wood was alive, that it breathed and moved and remembered. His mother had been a schoolteacher who made him read everything he could get his hands on. History especially, because she believed that a man who didn't know where he came from had no business deciding where he was going. Thomas had taken both lessons to heart. He approached restoration work like a surgeon, slow and deliberate, reading the grain of every board, studying the way light fell on plaster, understanding that every nail hole was a piece of evidence. He had a reputation for being meticulous to the point of obsession, and he'd earned it. Working alongside him was his nephew David, 28 years old and hungry to prove himself. David had apprenticed under Thomas for 5 years, learning not just how to cut and fit and finish, but how to see, how to notice the things other people walked past, how to understand that a house was a document and every layer was a page. The rest of the crew rounded out the team. Marcus Webb, 63 years old, a local man whose family had been in the valley since before the Revolution. Marcus knew everyone and everything. He could tell you who built what, and when and why. And he could tell you the stories behind the stories, the ones that didn't make it into the history books. James Patterson, a young hotshot from Richmond who had more energy than experience and needed watching. Robert Chen, a mason who could look at a brick and tell you which kiln it came from and which decade it was laid. And Bill Hutchkins, 46, general laborer, the strongest man on the crew and the one who kept everyone laughing when the work got long and the heat got unbearable. They were a good crew, a solid crew, the kind of men who showed up on time and did their jobs and didn't complain. They'd worked together on half a dozen projects over the years, and they trusted each other. That trust was about to be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. They started on the second floor on the morning of June 23rd, working their way through what had once been the master bedroom. The room was big and airy, with tall windows that looked out over the overgrown gardens and the hills beyond. The kind of room where important decisions had been made, where lives had been planned and futures decided. Now it was just another workspace, empty except for their tools and the dust that rose in clouds every time they pried up another board. David was working a section near the far wall when he felt it. The floorboard shifted under his pry bar with almost no resistance. Not the grudging give of old nails reluctantly letting go, but something else. Something smooth. Something deliberate. He looked at Marcus, who was working a few feet away. Marcus must have seen something in his face, because he set down his tool and came over, kneeling beside David on the dusty subfloor. "That's not right," Marcus said quietly. David worked the board carefully, and it came up in his hands like it had been waiting for him. Beneath it was a gap. Not the normal space between joists, but a hollow that had been deliberately created. About 2 feet long and 8 inches wide, lined with oilcloth that had yellowed and cracked with age. Someone had folded that cloth carefully, creating a protective pocket, and then replaced the board above it. As if nothing was there, David called for his uncle. Thomas came down from the 3rd floor, moving with that deliberate slowness he had, the kind that said he'd learned long ago not to rush toward the unknown. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking it in. The light from the windows fell across the gap, and dust motes danced in the beams, like they were performing some kind of ritual. "Don't touch anything else," Thomas said. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. A recognition, a weight. What followed was as careful as an archaeological dig. Thomas photographed everything from every angle. The board in place. The board removed. The gap from above, from the side, from any angle that might matter later. He measured and noted and documented, building a record that would survive even if the items themselves didn't survive handling. Only when he was satisfied did he reach in and begin to remove what had been hidden. 3 items. A leather-bound journal, the cover cracked to a soft brown, the pages yellowed to the color of old bone. A bundle of letters tied with a ribbon that had once been blue and was now the color of ash. And a small wooden box, no bigger than a man's hand, with a brass clasp turned green with age. The box was locked. Thomas set them on a clean cloth and stepped back. The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the sounds of the other workers continued, the scrape of tools, the murmur of voices, the ordinary noise of a day's work. But in here, something had shifted. A secret that had been kept for 124 years was beginning to breathe. Thomas opened the journal first, handling it like it might crumble at his touch. The first page was blank. The second page bore a title written in precise, elegant handwriting. A true account of events that occurred at Belle Grove in the year of our Lord 1863. Written by Catherine Ashton, wife of Henry Ashton, in the hope that truth might survive even when justice cannot. He turned the page and began to read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have committed an act today that will haunt me until my dying breath. The weight of what I have done presses upon my chest like a stone, and I fear that God himself has turned his face away from me. I write this account not in hopes of forgiveness, for I do not deserve it, but as a record of the truth. Someone must know. Someone must remember what was done here in the name of preserving a way of life that was already dying." Thomas stopped reading. The 3 men stood in silence. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, though the summer heat outside hadn't changed. Whatever they had found, it was bigger than a forgotten diary. It was a confession, and the woman who wrote it had wanted it found. Thomas made the decision to call Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a historian from the University of Virginia who specialized in the social history of the antebellum South. He'd worked with her before, on a plantation in Albemarle County 5 years earlier. She arrived the next morning at 9 o'clock sharp, driving a beat-up Honda Civic that had seen better decades. She was in her late 60s, with sharp eyes and the kind of quiet authority that made you want to tell her the truth. She spent the first hour just looking at the items, not touching, just studying. Then she put on cotton gloves and began to examine them more closely. "This is significant," she said finally. "The leather is good quality. The paper is good quality. This was created by someone who wanted it to last, someone who wanted the record to survive." She opened the small wooden box. The lock gave way with gentle pressure. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had once been white, was a daguerreotype, a photograph so old the image had faded to a ghost. It showed a young woman, maybe in her 20s, with dark hair and a serious expression. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes looked directly at the camera, directly at anyone who would view this image more than a century later. There was something in those eyes. Not sadness, not quite resignation, something more complex. A kind of awareness, a kind of knowing. Over the next week, the restoration work stopped. The room where the items had been found was sealed off with plastic sheeting. Dr. Hayes began the painstaking work of research. She combed through property records at the courthouse in Harrisonburg. She studied census data from the 19th century. She searched newspaper archives. She interviewed Marcus Webb, whose own family had roots in the valley stretching back generations. And she read the journal, every page, every word. Catherine Ashton had been born in Philadelphia in 1820, the daughter of a merchant family with abolitionist sympathies. Her father had been involved in the Underground Railroad. Her mother had been a supporter of women's rights. Catherine had grown up believing slavery was a moral evil. But in 1845, she met Henry Ashton. He was charming, attentive, and wealthy. Her family tried to stop the marriage. They warned her about the South, about what it would mean to live in a slave-owning society. But Catherine was young and in love, and she believed she could change him. She was wrong. For 15 years, she played the role of a Southern planter's wife. She managed the household. She raised 2 children. She hosted dinner parties and attended social gatherings. But the journal revealed the cost. Page after page of private anguish, of growing horror at the system she lived in. She wrote about the enslaved people who worked in her house. Their names, their faces, their stories. She wrote about a woman named Ruth, who had been brought to Belle Grove as a young girl and had worked in the kitchen for 30 years. She wrote about Ruth's daughter, Sarah. Sarah was intelligent, quick, witted, and beautiful. Catherine taught her to read in secret, risking everything to do it. She wrote about the conversations they had, the questions Sarah asked about the world beyond the valley, about freedom and what it might mean. But there was a note of growing anxiety in Catherine's entries about Sarah. She understood, even before the events of 1863, that Sarah's intelligence and beauty made her vulnerable. In a society built on slavery, a young woman who was intelligent and beautiful and of mixed race was a threat. A living reminder of relationships that were supposed to be invisible, unacknowledged, denied. And then, in early 1863, something changed. The entry dated March 10th was brief and cryptic. "Henry has made a decision that I cannot support. He believes that the war will be lost, that the South cannot prevail. He is making arrangements to protect his interests, to ensure that when the Union comes, we will not be left destitute. But the cost of his plan is something I cannot bear. I have tried to argue with him, but he will not listen." The next entry, dated March 15th, was the one Thomas had read aloud, but there were more. March 18th. "I have tried to convince myself that there was no other way. I have tried to believe that Henry's reasoning was sound. But I cannot lie to myself any longer. What we have done is a sin against God and against humanity. I lie awake at night, and think about what will happen to her. And I feel as though I am going mad. March 22nd. Sarah is gone. I do not know where she has been taken. Henry will not speak of it. Ruth has not left the kitchen in 3 days. She sits at the table and stares at nothing, and when I try to speak to her, she does not respond. I cannot blame her. I am complicit in this. Dr. Hayes turned to the bundle of letters. They were addressed in a precise, formal hand and bore postmarks from Richmond and North Carolina. The first was dated March 20th, 1863, and addressed to Henry Ashton. She read it aloud. Dear Mr. Ashton, I have received your letter of March 15th, and I understand the delicate nature of your situation. I have a colleague, Dr. Silas Croft, who operates a private establishment in western North Carolina. The facility specializes in the care of individuals with nervous conditions and moral deficiencies. It is a respectable institution. The young woman in question could be admitted under an assumed name. Her records would be sealed. No one in your community would ever know of her whereabouts or her condition. The room fell silent. David had gone pale. Marcus was staring at the letter like he couldn't believe what he was reading. They were sending her away. Thomas said quietly, "To an asylum." Dr. Hayes nodded. Not just an asylum, a private institution, a place where she could be hidden. And the language they used, nervous conditions, moral deficiencies. These were the euphemisms for women who didn't fit society's expectations. The second letter was Henry's response, agreeing to the arrangement and offering $500, a fortune in 1863, more than a year's wages for a laborer. The third letter, dated April 5th, was from Dr. Croft himself. Dear Mr. Ashton, I write to confirm that the young woman has been safely admitted under the name Sarah Wells. She arrived on April 3rd in good health, though somewhat distressed. She will be kept in a secure room on the 3rd floor, where she will be safe, and where she will not be able to disturb the other patients. Dr. Hayes set the letters down. We need to find out what happened to her. We need to know if she survived, if she ever escaped, if there's any record of her after 1863. But finding Sarah proved almost impossible. The asylum in North Carolina had burned down in 1889, taking most of its records with it. Dr. Croft had died in 1875. The trail went cold. But Dr. Hayes was persistent. She contacted historical societies. She placed ads in genealogy forums. She reached out to descendants of the Ashton family. And then, almost by accident, she found something. A woman named Patricia Croft, a great-great-granddaughter of Dr. Silas Croft, had been researching her family history. Among some old documents in her grandmother's attic were several letters and a small journal that had belonged to her ancestor. In one of the letters, dated 1875, Dr. Croft had written to his wife about a patient who had been with him for many years. A young woman admitted under the name Sarah Wells, who had arrived in 1863 with no family and no prospects. She has been a difficult patient, he wrote, but I believe that with proper treatment, she may eventually achieve a state of relative stability. However, I must confess that I am not optimistic about her ultimate prognosis. But there was more. In Dr. Croft's journal, a brief entry dated June 1875. The Wells girl escaped last week. She had been with us for 12 years, and I had begun to believe that she had accepted her situation, but she managed to obtain a key to the front gate. I suspect one of the servants gave it to her. She simply walked away. I have made inquiries, but there is no trace of her. I suspect she may have attempted to return to Virginia. The discovery sent Dr. Hayes on a new search. If Sarah had escaped in 1875 and tried to return to Virginia, there should be some record. She searched newspaper archives, and she found it. In the Richmond Dispatch dated October 15, 1875, a brief notice. A woman of mixed race giving her name as Sarah Wells was arrested in Staunton on charges of vagrancy and trespassing. She claimed to be a former resident of the valley and stated that she was attempting to locate family members. She was unable to provide documentation. The magistrate ordered her to leave the county within 24 hours. And then another notice. This one from a newspaper in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, dated November 1875. A woman named Sarah Wells has been admitted to the Harper's Ferry home for indigent women. She is believed to be in her 30s, though she appears older due to hardship. She has no family and no means of support. The home is seeking any information about her origins or relatives. The trail ended there. The Harper's Ferry home had closed in 1920. Its records were lost in a fire. But Dr. Hayes had found enough. Sarah had escaped the asylum. She had tried to return home. She had been turned away. And she had ended up in a home for indigent women in West Virginia, where she likely spent the rest of her life. Thomas Garrett stood at the window of the restoration office, looking out at the grounds of Belle Grove. The summer afternoon was fading into evening. The old house seemed to settle into itself, like it had finally released a burden it had been carrying for more than a century. "Why did Catherine hide the journal?" David asked. "Why not destroy it? Why leave it for someone to find?" Dr. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Because she needed someone to know. She needed the truth to survive. Even if it took 100 years. She couldn't save Sarah, but she could ensure that Sarah wouldn't be completely forgotten. That's why she hid it beneath the floorboards. She knew that someday, someone would find it. And when they did, they would know what had happened here. The discovery at Belle Grove became more than a local story. The Washington Post sent a reporter. The New York Times published an article. National Public Radio produced a segment, but the reaction in the local community was complicated. Some people were fascinated. Others were defensive. Others were angry that the story had been hidden for so long. Marcus Webb found himself at the center of it all. His own family had been enslaved in the valley. His great-grandmother had escaped north in 1862 and never saw her family again. Stories like Sarah's, he told one interviewer, they're not unusual. They're just usually not documented. We don't have journals and letters. We just have silence. We have the knowledge that people disappeared, that families were separated, that lives were destroyed. So when we find something like this, it's like finding a voice that has been silent for more than 100 years. It's like Sarah is finally able to speak. The Preservation Foundation decided to expand the restoration project. They hired Dr. Hayes as a consultant and began a comprehensive historical investigation of Belle Grove's past. They found records of other enslaved people. They found their names, their stories, their fates, and they discovered that Catherine Ashton had lived for another 3 years after the events of 1863. She had remained married to Henry, had raised her 2 children, and had died in 1906 at the age of 86. She had never publicly revealed what she knew about Sarah. But in her will, she had left a substantial sum of money to a school for colored children in Richmond, with a note that the donation was made in memory of those whose names have been forgotten. Henry Ashton had died in 1864, thrown from a horse while riding near the house. Some people whispered it was divine judgment. Others said it was just an accident. In 1995, on the 50th anniversary of the end of the Civil War, the Preservation Foundation held a dedication ceremony at Belle Grove. They unveiled a memorial to Sarah Ashton and to all the enslaved people who had lived and worked at the plantation. A simple stone placed in the garden behind the house. The inscription read, "In memory of Sarah Ashton and all those whose names were forgotten. May we remember them with truth and honor." Marcus Webb, now in his 80s, attended the ceremony. He stood before the memorial for a long time, his hand resting on the stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. My great-grandmother never knew what happened to her children. She died not knowing if they were alive or dead, free or enslaved. But Sarah's story, at least we know her story now. At least we can remember her. That's something. It's not enough, but it's something. Dorothy Hutchins, a descendant of Ruth, Sarah's mother, stood beside him. She thought about her grandmother, about the stories passed down through her family, about the resilience of people who had survived slavery and its aftermath. She thought about Sarah, about the courage it must have taken to escape, to build a new life, to send anonymous letters back to her mother, to let her know she was alive. She made it, Dorothy said softly. Sarah made it. She got away. That's what I want people to know. That's what I want to remember. The daguerreotype of the young woman, the photograph that had been hidden for more than a century, was carefully preserved and displayed at Belgrove. Visitors would stand before it and wonder about the woman in the image, about her life and her fate. Some people who visited the house reported feeling a strange sadness in that upstairs bedroom, a heaviness in the air, a sense of unresolved grief. Others dismissed it as suggestion, but the feeling was real enough to those who experienced it. The story of Belgrove and the discovery of Catherine's journal continued to resonate. The house became one of the most visited historic sites in Virginia. School groups came to learn about slavery and the Civil War. Historians came to study the documents. Descendants of the Ashton family came to confront their history. And the question at the heart of it all, the question that may never be answered, still hangs in the air like dust in a beam of light. What do you think really happened to Sarah? Do you believe the documents that suggest she was locked away in an asylum? Or do you trust the family stories that say she escaped to build a new life in freedom? The evidence points in two directions, and the truth, like so much of history, may be lost to time. But the question matters. It forces us to choose what we believe and why. So I'll ask you the same thing I ask myself every time I think about this story. Was Sarah Ashton a prisoner, or was she free? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more histories that refuse to stay buried. See you in the next one.